All right, my friends, so today we are talking about understanding, this is chapter 1 of our book, and it is on understanding economic systems and businesses. The very first thing, the very, start of what we are talking about. These are the course objectives. This is hopefully the learning outcomes for today. You'll be able to answer these wonderful questions. Feel free to read them later. Also, this is up on Canvas if you'd like to look at it as well. There's also a video recording that is very similar to today's lecture. All right. So essentially, how do businesses and nonprofit organizations help create our standards of living? That's the overall question from here, right? But let's begin with the very basic thing. Businesses, my friends, are engines of economic growth, innovations, and societal advancements. That's what they do. They keep society going forward. They directly contribute to something called the gross domestic product. Anyone here know what a gross domestic product is? The GDP, if you've heard of it. Anyone heard of GDP in the past? Okay, cool. We've got some people. That is the fundamental measure of economic health, by extension, standard of living, okay? So it measures economic health, it also measures the standards of living that we have in this country and in any country. So the higher GDP typically indicates a higher standard of living because it reflects more goods and services being produced. Higher employment rates, it also reflects an increasing income. This is essentially why, if you look at our current president, what he's trying to do is he's trying to bring labor back to the United States, right? Or they all say that, but hopefully that's the case. So the idea is to bring more work here so that more labor is produced or more of the products are produced in here, then they are exported, which means that the country is making more money, which raises the standard of living. Okay, so businesses also enhance the standards of living through innovation. Can anyone give me an example of how they can do that through innovation? Go ahead.
Say phones were pretty innovative. It gives us access to the internet and lots of things that we wouldn't have had access to like 50 or 100 years ago.
Absolutely. Does someone in the back have their hand raised? No? Did you have your hand raised? No? Okay, so that's one thing. What about now? What's the biggest thing in technology now? Go ahead.
AI.
AI, right? AI is pretty big. Okay, and it's not only changing the United States, but it's also changing the world as it is. And so you have things that like companies like Google, like Tesla, like Apple that are producing these new innovative things that are exporting it to the rest of the world. Okay, which we may not be producing things like the actual case for this phone or the phone itself. I think for the longest time, I don't know if they still say it. I don't know if it's still the case, but iPhones used to say designed in California on them. Do you guys remember that? I don't know if they're no longer designed in California, what happens to them, but so that just to say, oh, like actually we've produced things here. And so even with ideas. All right. So beyond economic benefits, businesses also contribute to the social welfare of people through corporate social responsibility initiatives. Any ideas what corporate social responsibility initiatives are? Big words. Put them together. What do we think?
Giving back to the community.
Absolutely, that's exactly it. It's giving back to the community. Can you think of any examples of companies doing that?
Using clean energy and
Okay, using clean energy is a great one. What else?
employing local people.
Employing local people, but that would be growing the economy this way, but they have a social responsibility, which
Sure.
is, go ahead. Sorry, we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Maybe like food shelters, giving away free
Yeah.
food.
Okay, that's great.
Charities.
Charities, yes, exactly. And so you have these initiatives that are like Tom's, for example, shoes, that one, they used to donate a pair for other people if you buy one pair with them. Like they do different things now. So those are things that help contribute to the social welfare as well. And so major corporations have been at the forefront of integrating sustainability into their business models, focusing on environmental impact, like you're saying, while still maintaining profitability. Then you have other things as well, like the nonprofit organizations, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that they had, and so forth, right? So these are all contributing to the social welfare. Okay. So how do businesses and nonprofit organizations help create our standard of living? That's the question we are addressing today. From a macroeconomics perspective, businesses and nonprofit organizations influence the standard of living through multiplier effect. That is, when businesses grow and prosper, they create employment opportunity, not just for their own operations, but for businesses across the supply chain. Okay, so it's not just about my business growing, but if my business is growing, then other businesses in my sector are also growing. And this is why it's also important to, if we're looking at it from a holistic country approach, as a macro, again, not micro, macro is the big picture. If you're looking at it from a country approach, then it would be the best thing that you can do is empower other American businesses to produce American goods so that the supply chain keeps going and all of it is growing. But let's say I'm producing something, but I'm selling something and I'm selling it really well and it's doing really good, but it's actually being produced somewhere else. Well, then that money is going from here to the other country. And that's good because you're essentially helping other countries develop, but also if we want to keep the standard of living, it usually is better to do things here. Now things here can get really costly, and this is where the dilemmas happen. Okay. All right, so other things, wages paid to employees enable increased consumption of goods and services. Driving further economic activities is the thing, but so for example, how many people here like to go to the movies? Okay, we have a few people. If you are not working, is it essential for you to go to the movies? No, right? But if you're getting paid and you have a job, and even if it's an okay job, and your rent is getting paid for, your food is getting paid for, would it be okay to spend movie tickets? Yeah, right? So if you are getting paid, you are enabled to increase the consumption of goods and services. So then if your business, if your company is paying you, then it's not only producing things for its sector, but it's also producing things for other people that it's employing as well. And that also raises the standards of living because now more things are present. More opportunities are present, more goods and services, more needs to fill, and so forth. Okay. Consider Silicon Valley, which is a tech boom. So companies like Facebook and Google expanded. When they expanded, Silicon Valley grew in housing, it grew in transportation, and the education sector grew across the region as well, as a result of Facebook and Google being at that place. Okay, so because there's a huge company there, now they need housing to house the employees. Because they need housing, they need transportation. So more cars are being sold there, maybe more buses from point A to point B. If there are people that are working, they typically have children. Those children need to go to schools. which now means that there's a boom in schooling as well. And not just a boom in schooling, but also the level of education that's there is higher because now the income that's being produced in the region is higher, okay? So these would be secondary and tertiary industries benefiting from the increased economic activities, ultimately improving the life qualities of the residents. Okay. So 4+1 factors of production. There are 5 factors of production that we're looking at. The last one is not necessarily a factor in the same sense, but it is there. So you've got natural resources, you've got labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and the last one, the +1, is the knowledge. Okay, the knowledge. They are the 5 pillars or the pillars of any economy. However, we are looking at, so let's look at the natural resources. So natural resources is like the extraction of earth metals would be natural resources, okay? These are things that are found in nature. These are things that you start with, like commodities, like minerals, like farmlands. These are the natural resources that are available. All right. Then you have labor, and labor is, it's the people that are working, okay? So labor is the human capital theory, and that suggests that economies that invest heavily in education, a little bit different, but essentially what you're looking at, the capital is the tools, the machinery, the capital is the economic contributions of people working with their minds and their muscles. So you can say the laborers in the field, but also you can say the engineers that are working at Apple, those are also labor. Does that make sense? So it doesn't mean manual labor. It could be mental labor as well. It could be all kinds of different people, different labor. Capital is beyond the physical capital, like the beyond the physical presence of labor and natural resources. We are looking at things like tools, machinery, equipment, and the buildings that are used to produce the goods and services to get them from point A to point B. Entrepreneurship is the people who combine the inputs of natural resources, the labor, the capital to produce the goods and services. So you have a person and they're like, okay, well, or people, they're like, okay, well, I can see this vision that if I put all these natural resources together, if I get these employees, if I put in this capital, then it will produce money, it will produce jobs, and these jobs will help boost the economy. And that's essentially what entrepreneurship is. And finally, knowledge, and we have in the United States, we have something called the knowledge-based economy in California, right? Very specifically, and it is the role of information and intellectual property that is found in these companies. So you have artificial intelligence, you have machine learning, all this stuff is knowledge-based. Questions? I don't know if I have the notes for these ones or I have the notes for them. Okay. So what are the sectors of business environment and how do we change and influence business decisions today? Well, the business environment can be understood as interplay of multiple sectors, each influencing business decisions in its unique way. And there is something called Porter's 5 forces that are influencing our society as well. And you have things like economic forces, technological, social, and legal and political. So these are economic cycles. These are the rise of technology that changes things around us. These are social changes that are happening that can disturb the economy. And these are political or legal things that can disturb the economy. So for example, they were talking about tariffs on Canada. Yeah, so increasing tariffs on Canada or raising them up. Tariffs are the taxes for import and export. There are car parts that cross the border over 20 times between here and Canada. Okay, the same part crosses over to each side about 20 times. Okay, well, if you have to pay taxes every time that product or that car part goes in or out of the country, then it's gonna be a lot more expensive than to produce it within the same country. So what's gonna happen is, so that would be political, right? Political impact on the economy. So what's gonna happen is, because of the current laws, we have to move the business from going between the US and Canada into just the US. And once the car is done, we will happily export it to Canada once and for all. Does that make sense? Okay, so that would be like a law changing. Societal values can also change. Societal norms. Pushing certain ideas forces businesses to react or interact in a certain way. One controversial issue is restrooms. Okay, gender neutral restrooms, or are men allowed into women's restrooms? Are women allowed into men's restrooms? Okay, so that is whether you're for it or against it. It doesn't really matter. What we're saying is that there is a social change that is forcing businesses to react in a certain way. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So in a hyper-connected world, businesses must navigate an intricate business dynamic or environment, or a dynamic environment in business, and it categorizes rapid technological advancements, shifting economic trends, and evolving customer behaviors. So you're looking at the internal environments, things like entrepreneurs, managers, workers, customers, and it is constantly changing. So there's a flux to external pressures. So the ones outside around the circle, those are the external pressures going on into this internal environment. So all of these are enacting changes on here. Cool? Questions so far? All right, so we have something called the economic system, which is a combination of policies, laws, and choices made by the government to establish the system that determines the goods and services are produced and how they are allocated, okay? And these over here are some of the most basic economic systems of the world. So what you have is the my notes are off by one and I can't figure out which one. Well, I'll feel like it's inverted, so give me a second. Why don't I notes at my? Okay. I guess they don't. We'll just continue. Okay, so these are the different types of economic systems of the world, you have the ownership of businesses. So businesses are privately owned with minimal government ownership or interference. Oh, sorry, all right, this makes sense. This is why my stuff is mixed up. All right, there we go. Ownership resources is. I just saw this. Okay, there we are. This table looks at the different economic systems based on capitalism, communism, socialism, and mixed economies. These are the most major types of different different systems of the world. So in capitalism, markets and businesses are privately owned, and the forces of supply and demand determines what is actually produced, and how it gets produced and so forth. So it's not controlled by the government, it is controlled by the supply and demand. The US is primary example of a capitalist economy where individual entrepreneurs, they enter into this competitive drive or into this competitive market, and they can create these businesses that they control. Communism features government ownerships of most industries, not a cool thing, in my opinion, and according to the United States and according to the war that happened. So communism is the government owning the majority of the industries. The system has things like countries like Cuba and North Korea, which are not the highlight of every country's dream, right? And so it is a centralized economic planning and eliminates private business ownerships, which can stifle innovation, but also provides equality in resource distribution in theory, right? In theory, this is the case, okay? Then you have socialism, so think countries like Finland and India, where a government controls over the majority of industries such as utility, healthcare, and education. Some sectors remain privately controlled. There's really high taxation and state regulation redistributes wealth more equally than capitalism. And the last one that you have is mixed economies. And mixed economies are places like France and Canada, where there's this balance between public and private sectors control while businesses operate freely in this capitalistic model. Some critical sectors like energy and healthcare are heavily regulated by the government, okay? So in France and in Canada, healthcare is very much regulated. It's a lot, everyone gets healthcare in Canada and in France, but the services are different, okay? The quality of services in Canada is different. All right, so how do economies grow? Full employment, price stability, inflation indicates a nation's economic health. While economic growth measured by the growth in the real GDP is a strong indicator of a nation's prosperity. So as the GDP grows, more goods and services are produced, businesses expand, and people enjoy a higher standard of living, okay? However, growth must be sustainable to avoid the pitfall of overheating economies, which can lead to inflation and asset bubbles as seen in the 2008 financial crisis, where the market crashed. I don't know if you guys remember any of this, but the market crashed really badly in 2008. And yeah, everyone here should be older than 2008. So you can see that there where things got escalated relatively quickly, okay? So it's very, very important for the economy to go up and be sustainable, okay? To grow in a sustainable fashion. Full employment, my friend, refers to an economy where the unemployment rate is low, typically considered between 3 to 5%. And that indicates that the vast majority of people are able to work, that want to work, are actually employed. And it contributes to both the economic output and the economic demand, okay? So you're looking at a society where everyone who can work is working. That's what full employment is. Everyone who wants to work, everyone who can work are actually having a job. Then you have things like frictional unemployment, such as when people temporary between jobs. So let's say you lose your job today, but you're still willing to work, you're applying for a job, you get a job 3 weeks from now, that would be frictional unemployment. And then the last thing we're gonna look at here is price stability. And that means that inflation remains low and predictable, and that allows consumers and businesses to make long-term financial plans without fears of erosion or eroding purchase power. So you're looking at, if there is price stability, then you're more inclined to buy a house, you're more inclined to make investments, you're more inclined to make the things that are bigger actually happen. How are we doing so far? How do you feel about businesses and about about the different economies, about this introduction?
You said that the like ideal unemployment rate is like 3 to 5%.
That's if it's in a full it's in the full employment. Yeah, I don't know what the current rate is, let's find out.
The unemployment rate, it says it's 5.4.
So it's not too bad.
So with like, I mean, I would say that's pretty like good.
Yeah.
It's only 0.4 over. But then like, what about the price changes we have right now? Like, that's pretty like fluctuating.
So like inflation,
Like
gas. Yeah, like gas going up. What's the question?
So like, how does that correlate? Cause like everybody's working, everyone's like let's say this is for California. California says that in October 2024, 5.4% of the labor force was unemployed. So that's saying like pretty much everybody's working, right?
Yeah, but they raised the minimum wage,
So,
so cost of labor went up. And if if the employer has to pay the X amount of number plus 20, then so whatever my base salary is plus 20% or whatever, however much they raise the oh my gosh, what did I just say? What is it?
minimum.
Thank you. So now the cost of labor goes up and so does the cost of things that are being produced. Right? Because now the employer has to pay more, which means that they have to charge more. And then the cycle continues. So there are other factors that affect the economy that are around us as well, besides the employment rate.
So if minimum wage keeps going up, that means like everything is gonna keep going up. So why doesn't it just?
Beyond me, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I know the basics of economics, but these are bigger questions, and I've asked the same ones myself. I'm like, I don't. It seems pretty simple to me. But then they raise the prices of housing, so people can't afford to buy houses anymore. And then it just becomes a thing, and then now you have a loan of $1 million to get a 3-bedroom house in San Dimas, right? $1.5 million of loans. You've got people that are not, they're working full-time, but they can't afford to live by themselves because rent has gone up, and rent has gone up because of a whole host of things, because of inflations or policies that were happening before, because of new things that are happening. There's just so many different factors that play into it. So it's not just the employment rate. It's the you have things like the the minimum wage, you have things like policies, you have things like taxes, which California loves to do. Okay, they love raising taxes because they think they're cool. You cross the border to Nevada and all of a sudden, you know, when prices of gas was $7 here, it was $4 over there. And you're like, well, what's going on? Right, and this is why you see a lot of people leave California to go somewhere else because, well, you know, the price of living or the cost of living in Texas is a lot cheaper.
It's because of our governor.
Like, it's not policies in California are the topic for a different day, but essentially, the fire shouldn't have burned down all these houses. We should have had water in the stuff where water should have been, but we're too busy creating things that we shouldn't be focusing on. And also, people are distracted. We're on our phone 2-3 hours a day scrolling through social media, the majority of us. So we're too distracted to actually stop and think and ask what this policy is about and how it's going to affect us. We're also not considering the things that could be because we hear one side of the argument and we believe it readily. We end up sorry. We end up not discerning what it is that we need to do. And so it's like, there was this story in marketing that they used to say that a woman is suing Starbucks because she got burned by the hot coffee. Who do you think is at fault? Do you think McDonald's is the person who, the company who's at fault, or do you think the woman is just being ridiculous and suing for no reason?
Being ridiculous.
Did you mean Starbucks or McDonald's?
Sorry, McDonald's. That was the
True
case
story.
that was happening, yeah. Well, she actually got a 3rd-degree burn because that coffee fell on her. And she had got to go to the hospital and she had to undergo a bunch of treatment, but because and this, you know, like there are some cases where people sue for ridiculous things and you're like, you're just being ridiculous. But because media played it out in such a way, because McDonald's could afford to pay something like this, the true problem is that this woman really got badly injured as a result of their negligence, right? Let's say that. And so a lot of times media would have you side with one person versus one side over the other because it doesn't portray the truth, or it puts things in a way that makes associations with things. And for the record, when I was in university and my professor said this story, I was like, she's being ridiculous too. Like she's being ridiculous because we're so used to people being ridiculous and someone joined.
It would depend also that if it was on the transfer of the employee giving it to the lady.
It would, right? It's also, what is it?
So like, why are they giving coffee that hot? Like if it's
They-
not.
Yeah, they shouldn't be giving coffee that hot, but also the thing is, the idea that I'm trying to say is not this particular case, but how are we receiving our information and knowledge about things? And where and who are we receiving it from? Ever run into a person that just loves talking about people? My Hispanics chisme, right? They're just like, oh my gosh, so-and-so. And you know they're creating things. You know they're over exaggerating things and to make it seem all dramatic and to make themselves feel like they know what they're talking about. Ever met these people? Well, a lot of times we have to be aware of who that media source is. Just like if you see that person, you know they're BS, right? You know they're not telling you the truth. And so we have to be aware of, oh, is this the same kind of situation? And where is this actually coming from? Yeah. So there are different factors that would be involved. So the monetary policies that we have. What is this? No. Okay. Monetary policy is managed by the Federal Reserves. And it involves controlling the money supply and setting interest rates to influence economic activities. And when the economy is overheated or overheats during periods of high inflation, the Feds may raise interest rates to reduce borrowing and increase money supply to encourage borrowing and investment. And then, like, depending on if it's growing, they will reduce it. They will raise it to reduce borrowing and cool down the demand. And if it is during a recession, they will lower the interest rates so that people are more likely to borrow. And if they're more likely to borrow, then they're more likely to invest. And since we figured out that it's all cyclical, if you invest and your business starts making money, then the sector around you starts making money. And then secondary sectors like education and transportation and health and all these things start growing at the same time. Okay, so they want people to invest during recessions. Okay. The fiscal policy, on the other hand, is managed by governments through spending and taxation. So by increasing government spending or cutting taxation, the government injects more money into the economy, and that boosts demand. So during a budget deficit, when like the money is less than it should be, it may reduce spending or raise taxes to balance the budget. So essentially, a budget deficit is you have a budget and you went over what you should have gone over, and now you are losing the money, right? Now you're at a loss. Now there's a deficit. So what does the government do? They raise your taxes. Like, okay, well, we're gonna tax you more so that we can cover that budget. Or they also reduce the spending, which they're not very successful at as a general rule of thumb. So the US federal can't function today, my brain does not want to work. The US federal budget is a key component of national economic policy, and these charts break down both revenue sources and expenditures. So where are they getting the money and where is that money going within the US? And so on one side, or on the side of the revenue side, talking about this one, you are looking at individual income taxes makes up 48% of where the money is coming from. Then you have Social Security and other payroll taxes, corporate taxes, other taxes and duties, and then you go into where they're actually being spent. So you got 23%, 24% on Social Security, Medicare, interest debt, and so forth. Okay, 16% on defense. And tough, my notes are still off. We already did this one. I gotta do these ones. Types and market structure. I was looking at the same one. Okay, So market structure dictates how much control firm has over pricing and competition. In a perfect competition, firms are price takers because no single firm can influence the market due to the large numbers of competitors offering identical products. So this is what we're looking at, okay? So you got 4 different types of these competitions. You've got a perfect competition, you've got a pure monopoly, you've got a monopolistic competition, and you've got an oligopoly. And so in the perfect competition, firms are price takers because no single firm can influence the market due to the large numbers of competitors offering identical prices. That means that they take the price that's given. That's it. Okay, there are so many other competitors in a perfect monopoly that they can't raise the prices. They have to look at the market and price it based on that. In a pure monopoly, one firm dominates, giving it higher pricing power, but these markets are often regulated by governments to prevent price gougings, whatever it is, and protect consumers. So essentially, I believe when Microsoft was growing and Apple was just starting, Microsoft dominated the entire country, and they had to pay Apple so Apple can grow, so that because a pure monopoly is not legal in the United States. So they had to kind of invest in their competitors so that their competitors can grow. The other thing is that you can look at, do you guys remember when the EpiPens prices skyrocketed? That's kind of like because there's not many competition, they can do that. It's not good, but they were able to do that because there's no one competing. So monopolistic competition is prevalent in industries where many firms offer products that are not identical but similar, allowing some level of price control. So the differentiating factors here is that they're based on things like branding, quality, or customer service, and that gives firms more flexibility in pricing rather than a perfect competition. So let's say you have a Louis Vuitton purse. What's the price range on that? Any ideas? $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, whatever the case is, right? I know, it's insane. If you want to buy a bag from Target or Walmart, what's the highest price? What is it? 30, 40, maybe at max 100 if it ever reaches there, right? They're both bags. They do the same thing. They could be like a fashion statement or whatever.
Aren't they technically both made by probably the same factories, just different logos?
They could be, depends. It depends on the brand itself. But it definitely does not cost them $5,000 to make it. Right? And so they are able to play with the pricing because they have things like control over like branding or quality or customer service, right? If you walk in, has anyone ever walked into one of those like Louis Vuitton stores or stores like that? It's usually one person meets you at the door. They're basically overwhelm you with their presence and they walk with you throughout the entire journey, and they, it's like so personalized that you feel like you're paying for this services as well. Like buying a car, right? If you walk into the Mercedes dealership, it's gonna feel a little bit different than if you're walking into a Kia. Or you expect it to be different because of the brand. Okay, so which trends are reshaping the business, microeconomics and macroeconomics environment and competitive arena? First and foremost, you are looking at the workplace. You're looking at maybe like the the age differences or the generational differences and how they're thinking and things like that. So you've got Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, silent Gen, and greatest Gen. They get to be the greatest Gen. Wow. Very cool. All right, so differences in how Gen Z is entering the new workforce, what values they bring, what's the demand for flexible work. So you've got baby boomers that are retiring in large numbers now because they're at that retirement age. And so you have people that are sorry, I cannot focus today. I think I need food and water. Okay, anyway, so differences in values that they bring. For example, Gen Z loves working remotely a lot of the time. What's the Gen Alpha? There's a new one. And so then you have people that now are bringing in a different value set, and you have people that have already some certain value sets there, and those are playing in and they are reshaping the business environment. So maybe my dad doesn't love working from home. Okay, he is used to getting up and going in the morning and find purpose there. I was talking to someone today. She was asking me like what kind of jobs I'm looking for and whatever. And I said, well, I would love to do a remote job. She's like, oh, well, why? And I was like, well, I talked to my own shadow if my own shadow was standing next to me. Obviously I saw the case, but I'm very talkative. And so if I see people in the office, I like talking to them. If I want to get things done, I like to do it by myself, right? And so because of the work environment, that's now an option for me. It's now an option for me to say, okay, well, I want to look for remote work where I can do that. Or I want to be able to raise a family while working full-time, right? Or saying, I want to make, home cooked meal for my kids during lunch, right? I get an hour of lunch in a full-time job, so I can go downstairs if I'm working remotely and I can make that food. Does that make sense? Now there are jobs where that's not the case, like nursing. I think someone wanted to go into nursing here. So like nursing, for example, you have to be in person. If you're a doctor, things are changing for doctors as well. The technological landscape is also changing. Because of COVID, telehealth grew a lot, which meant that people who are senior citizens who are in their 90s maybe or 80s to 90s, they can stay at home and they don't have to come and visit the doctor, and the doctor could sit there and talk to them via telehealth. And those are things and options that are changing. Okay. Questions? All right. Can I just finish? Oh. How is it that I have more notes? Okay. Oh, because I didn't go over these. All right.